The moment Harrison Ford's distinguished figure appeared on the familiar set of The View, camera lights glinting off his weathered face, there was an unusual hush, as if audiences sensed this interview wouldn't follow the gentle, anecdote-filled path they expected. Joy Behar, known both for her warmth and her sharp wit, greeted him with sincere admiration for his film legacy, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, decades of cultural icons, before pivoting pointedly into what had become a brewing controversy: Ford's philanthropic work, his outspoken remarks about climate change, and his recent comments on cancelled celebrity culture, which had polarized many. Ford, usually calm and reflective, adjusted in his chair. He started with measured humility, nodding to Joy's praise and acknowledging that speaking up on global issues was something I feel obligated to do, but in doing so he briefly sidestepped the real reason he'd come on the show, to address criticism that he'd disrespected fans by canceling appearances after backlash to his political activism. "I don't cancel, I reconsider," he offered, trying to land as thoughtful. Behar's eyes didn't soften. She leaned in and asked, "So when a group says they feel unheard, your choice is worth risking your reputation over theirs?" Ford's pleasant tone stiffened as Behar pressed again, whether he felt entitled to a blanket defense because of his fame. He responded gently, "Some voices have been quiet for too long." But Behar followed up with sharper edge, "Is your silence louder than theirs?" And suddenly a crack split the calm veneer. Ford's jaw clenched. He paused, then replied, voice low, "It's not silence. It's listening." The exchange jolted the studio, even Whoopi shifted in her chair. Ford glanced off camera, composing himself. Behar leaned forward, smile fading. "Listening is more than staying quiet. Don't you think action matters more than optics?" This felt like a turning point. Ford's eyes narrowed as he adjusted his posture. "I believe action is rooted in intention." He sifted through past environmental projects he'd funded, wildlife refuges he'd supported, and then offered, "I wish my record spoke louder than any headline." Behar's tone turned skeptical. Or did they not make headlines because headlines cost ratings? Laughter rippled across the panel. Ford's face reddened. "I decide what's worth that risk," he shot back. It was the first crack of frustration, and the studio collectively leaned in, sensing gravity had turned to tension. Joy pressed on, bringing up that Ford traveled to Washington to lobby, only to leave early. Fans felt insulted, advocacy groups felt abandoned. Ford paused, expression pained. Sometimes walking off is part of walking toward what matters. He touched the table, briefly closing his eyes. The audience held its breath. Behar fired back, "That sounds like veiled protest, not dialogue." Ford leaned forward, gaze steady, "Or maybe it's the only honest response when words fail." The idea of honest response flared. Behar, leaning past her desk, challenged his use of nuance. "Is nuance just another word for not standing up?" Ford took a breath. His tone softened. "Nuance is how we hold complexity." But Joy persisted. "When did complexity become avoidance?" Ford's fingers drummed on the table for a moment, then he replied, "When complexity meant evolving, not echoing." The air thickened, cameras watching tension, the audience hushed. It was Exhibit A, famous man weighed down by fame's expectations clashing with sharp-tongued host anchoring the moral center of viewership. Behar, now pivoting to celebrity culture, asked why Ford, a voice of reason on global issues, appeared to steer clear of his more vocal movie peers when they strayed into culture wars. Ford focused on, "Behar, not everyone's stage is built for every issue." She shot back, "So why yours?" He leaned back, pausing, study-like, "Because some lines are better held by those seeking them, not hunted for clicks." They reached a crescendo. Behar asked directly, "Are you staying silent because it's safe, or because you're scared of being cancelled?" Ford's face hardened. He swallowed once, then said with calm authority, "Fear of losing doesn't justify muting what you believe." Joy nodded in acknowledgement, satisfied, but not quite trusting. Ford paused, voice thick, "Maybe walking off is the only way to walk on your conscience." That exchange hung heavy. The host intervened softly to start closing, but Ford met her eyes and asked, "Is it really over?" The room trembled as cameras reframed. Behar stared at him, then paused, tension melting into recognition, and said simply, "If that's where we meet, yes." Ford stood abruptly, chair screeching. "I meant it," he said quietly. Then, turning to the audience, he said, "Thank you for listening." He walked straight off frame. A beat passed. Then the applause started, halting, then building. But Ford was gone. The studio fell quiet again. Cameras still rolling, Joy leaned back, visibly unmoored, her usual wit stilled. She turned to the host and whispered, "I think we lost an ally tonight." The show ended on a note of solemn reflection rather than the usual banter. Clips immediately flickered online. Ford storms off the view after calling nuance courage. Joy pushes Ford to the edge. Between silence and shouting, Ford picks conscience. Social media lit up. In the hours that followed, the narrative spun outward. Entertainment outlets debated whether Ford had withdrawn in triumph or retreat. Praise poured from fans who felt he'd chosen dignity over drama. Critics blasted him for refusing to stay the course. Ford didn't respond publicly. His team shared only a brief statement. He stood by what he believed. The backlash and support tumbled into headlines overnight, rebranded under trending tags like #NuanceNotNoise and #FordStoodFast. Behind the scenes at The View, producers scrambled. Did they cross a line, push too hard, or offer a moment of real reckoning? Behar recorded a quick internal reflection, saying, "We asked the hard question, at cost, not to provoke, but to hold to light." Others said live TV rarely reaches truth like this. Meanwhile, Ford retreated to a nature refuge with his wife, stepping away from social media, contemplating what he'd done, knowing that moments like this, raw, unresolved, unfiltered, were rare and consequential. And as the country parsed tone and tension, many found themselves reflecting deeper. Do we value voices that stay and fight, or voices that walk when the heart says no? The choice, like silence or speech, bravery or boundary, remained open for the nation to decide. As Harrison Ford's footsteps receded, leaving behind the white glow of the set and a palpable void where once stood a cultural icon, the studio lights dimmed, not on a show, but on an unsaid truth that neither question nor answer could fully fill, and in that pregnant silence everyone felt the gravity of what had passed. A man whose career symbolized heroism and introspection had chosen conscience over appearance, and the sound of a step, impatient, deliberate, marked not just his departure, but a fracture in how public figures perform under scrutiny. Joy Behar, leaning on her desk, closed her eyes for a moment as if to steady herself, then exhaled slowly before looking up at the cameras with sincerity and weariness intertwined as she attempted to reconcile the role she'd played in bringing the exchange to a fever pitch. She cleared her throat and gently said, "Sometimes questions demand more courage than answers," and that statement, simple but loaded, reframed her previous line of inquiry not as confrontation but as call to accountability, even if the refusal to comply remained an act of defiance, and in that crucible, the dynamic between host and guest had shifted from argument to rupture, from curiosity to consequence. Behind the scenes, a hush hung around production staff. Whoopi Goldberg, normally quick to inject levity, sat reflective, her usual banter replaced by a thoughtful silence punctuated only by the distant click of crew preparing to leave. Producers huddled to assess the moment, had they'd crossed a line or captured a moment of truth. Legal and PR teams began drafting damage control statements, while advisors peppered Behar with questions about tone and timing, and whether the episode would cast her as a provocateur or a truth teller. Similarly, in the green room where Ford had left his notes and coat, a small pile remained untouched, not a discarded record of a failed appearance, but a testament to a choice not to remain in a conversation that crossed into something personal and raw, a line he'd once crossed willingly, but now refused to, because the cost felt too high. Within hours, the digital echo storm hit. Clips of Ford standing, his voice steady yet fading as the studio lights dimmed, circulated with titles like, "Ford Walks into the Silence," and, "The Hero Who Didn't Stay." Across platforms, viewers debated whether his departure was cowardice or courage. One screenwriter on Twitter wrote, "He walked off not because he lacked answers, but because he refused to be directed." Another commentator noted that the moment revealed something deeper about the actor many grew up admiring, someone unwilling to contort his moral compass to fit a broadcast narrative. The internet buzzed, but beneath the speculation was a deeper question. When questioned beyond comfort, does withdrawal become self-respect, or abdication? By the next morning, mainstream media was in overdrive. Entertainment websites ran contrived polls. TV anchors replayed the fiery highlights, Ford's stand, Joy's counter, and even regional news hosts debated whether this marked an outburst or a quiet stand. Less public, but perhaps more consequential, was what happened within policy circles. Environmental advocacy groups, once aligned with Ford, muttered surprise. Some praised him for prioritizing principle over publicity, others worried that his silence weakened a movement already struggling for sustained momentum. Similarly, political operatives saw symbolism in the exchange, a conservative icon resistant to performative red carpet politics, and a liberal host pushing the limits of televised accountability, but would either side emerge stronger? The question lingered: had each spoken honestly, or had both walked away from complexity? Gradually, ripples of introspection emerged at shared gathering spots. A morning cafe rumored to host local media mixers buzzed with the line visitors had over lunch, when Dunnigan met Durden, but neither blinked. Journalists wrote essays about the cost of nuance in a blunt age. A university communications professor sent out study prompts asking, when does confrontation cross into cancellation? And when daytime shows reopened their bookings, few high-profile figures signed up. Public platforms now carried an unspoken warning: walk on but beware the moment your moral bungee cord snaps. In the martial rhythm of Hollywood and Washington elite, the fallout continued. Ford retreated to private gridlines, delivered a short statement through his representative: the path that redefines you often comes with an exit, not applause. Behar, meanwhile, took a rare editorial break and participated in a closed interview with the show's executive producer. She explained, it wasn't about forcing him to stay, it was about asking whether silence speaks louder than statements. In that private moment, she acknowledged her tone had been harsher than usual, but defended the choice. Civic speech isn't always easy, even heroes should sit in the hot seat. A week later, Ford accepted a single invitation: to be interviewed by a reputable long-form news magazine broadcast. There, off red carpets, he spoke quietly but resolutely about boundaries, purpose, and legacy, saying he valued discourse but feared it had become performance for its own sake. The episode drew praise for sincerity, but also fueled critiques that he'd become a relic of complication. Whatever the judgment, the moment remained indelible, a reminder of what it looks like when someone chooses their principles over their platform. Back at The View, the episode was recontextualized in staff meetings, a case study on empathy under fire. Hosts received updated guest prep, not just talking points, but emotional checkpoints, how to ask tough questions without burning the bridge of connection. The show released a moment clip on their website, Joy's Take: sometimes questions demand more courage than answers. The framing wasn't about celebrity clash, but about risk, and tension, and the cost of clarity. Fast forward to months later, and the dust still shimmered. Ford made occasional comment at environmental retreats, calling on policy to match his convictions. Behar, too, changed. In panels and during intros, she began noting the responsibility she held as questioner, and that even the hardest questions deserve a pathway home. At one gala, she referred obliquely to the moment: I asked a question that cracked the stage, no one expected the echo. The crowd sensed that behind her humor lay something more fragile, introspection born of a live, unfiltered moment. Public memory of that evening flickers between two portraits: of an actor unwilling to be boxed in, walking away when too much was asked, and of a host unafraid to ask what many only whispered. Opinions remained divided. Some remembered a moral hero shrugging off performance, others a celebrity rejecting accountability. But across generations, a quiet consensus emerged: in a world of noise, silence sometimes speaks volumes, and the tension lies not in speaking, but in knowing when to stop.